ongoing, to be continued. We're moving on to...
Yeah, we are, thank you again. We are moving on in this crazy experiment of 24 hours live. I'm just so inspired by this feels like the heart of what we do at LabShul, why we have an artistic director in the first place, because we know that artists bear witness to our lived experiences, our lived realities, and we get to bear witness to what these 24 hours can mean, what they can reveal, and what they can inspire in us and for each other. I'm joined now by my incredible co-host, Melissa Shaw. Hi, Melissa.
Hey, Ezra.
Hi. Where are you?
I am coming to you live from Brooklyn, New York.
Well, hello. So close and yet so far.
I know, I can almost touch you.
Well, welcome to the evening.
I know, I'm so happy to be here. I've been a member of the LabShul team before we were even LabShul. I'm of the old guard of storytelling, and I've come into the fold as a congregant and as an artist and as an educator. And I just want to say that at this juncture, listening to the artist who just spoke, and thinking about that pink dash, I just want to make a big shout out and a little bit of a pitch, a plea. You get to be the dash right now. You get to step into that hole that Day mentioned and fill it. And I just want to remind us that when you make a contribution right now by just picking up your phone and going to Venmo and sending the money to LabShul, you are contributing to the Thriving Artists Fund. And by doing that, you're helping to support the hiring of these independent musicians and actors and poets and dancers and everyone who's at the heart of this artist-driven community. So thank you so much. Grab that phone and make your contribution now, because we need you, and thank you for being part of this community.
I remember reading a post at the early stages of quarantine that said, if you think that artists aren't essential workers, try imagine being in quarantine without any music or Netflix or theater or art to look at or anything like that. In so many ways, art infuses with our lives and helps us cope with this crisis, and in so many ways beyond that. And to take us deep into that conversation, I'm truly, truly honored to welcome up to this virtual stage Jack Saul in conversation with Megan Auster-Rosen on the arts and collective repair in times of crisis. Jack is the director of the International Trauma Studies Program, which is a research and training institute based in New York City. It's committed to enhancing a natural resilience and coping capacities in individuals, families, and communities that have endured and are threatened by traumatic events, domestic, political, armed conflict, and natural disaster. It's profound and such important work. He's joined by Megan. Megan is a New York and California licensed clinical psychologist. She received her BA from Cornell and completed her doctorate at the clinical psychology. And we are so excited to bring them both on for the arts and collective repair in times of crisis. Thanks for being here.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Hello, Jack.
Okay.
So Megan and I are both
clinical psychologists and also artists.
And we do work that combines
the psychology work as well as the arts. And for years we've done that kind of work. And what we want to do is talk about a project that we've been working on recently that brings the testimonies of war reporters and veterans who witnessed, participated in the recent wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and who are suffering from what we call moral distress, moral injury. And this is a concept, it's a type of trauma that has to do with guilt and shame by what one has witnessed. And it's very difficult for the veterans particularly to talk about these things. And they end up becoming quite isolated, and it may be one of the contributors to the high number of suicides in veterans, almost 20 per day, due to these problems of conscience. So I started interviewing veterans and war correspondents. I've been working with war correspondents for the past 18 years who had been covering these wars, and realized that there needed to be a place through the arts to convey what they had witnessed, to give them a space to talk about what they were struggling with and what had witnessed. So I created an installation, physical installation that's an immersive sound experience, where the voices are played and people sit in a circle of 10 people to listen compassionately to what these people have to say. Megan, do you want to introduce?
Yeah, yeah. Can you hear me?
So actually, Megan, before you introduce yourself, I just want to say hi.
Yes.
I haven't met you yet.
Hi.
I'm Untitled Chapter from Lab Shul. Welcome, Megan. I heard so much about you.
Thank you.
From Jack. Welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. Jack,
Thank you.
brother. I'm so glad that you are here with us tonight. And really, your work has been so inspiring for me. And well, you were in Bucharest for Rosh Hashanah earlier in September, creating this exhibit, Jack. Esther was with us in New York at the Hammerstein Ballroom, and I really dedicated so much of the High Holy teaching to your work on how we move from moral injury to moral repair. And we were talking about the trauma of war and the trauma of living in this country and traumas of just our personal and collective. And who knew that we would be here, Jack, all these many months later, not only thinking about the amazing work you've been doing and Megan's been doing about veterans and about societies, but us right now with our moral injuries living at this moment tonight in this country and in the world. So I'm so grateful to you for continuing this conversation into the year with our community. I know this is work we're going to be continuing for many, many years, as this arc of injury to recovery is the key. So thank you so much for joining us, both of you. And I'm just going to sit here and listen, and very grateful to you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for saying you're going to sit here and listen, because that's kind of where I wanted to orient people to this installation we're going to show. It's a trailer for the installation. And I would like to invite you to engage with this as a participant or as a witness, rather than as a passive observer. The role of the witness or of the listener is as important as the person sharing the story. So notice your reaction, your responses, notice your body, and just remember that how you engage with this is part of the work. And we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. So you can cue the video. I'm not sure if it's happening.
Here. Oh, okay.
All righty. So we apologize for the technical difficulties. This is really a sound installation. And I believe you weren't able to hear the sound. Actually, I'm wondering, Jack, if you might just enumerate a little bit of what would have been heard. And then I can talk a little bit about it.
Okay, so what you probably were seeing were the people sitting and listening to the sound installation, but you weren't able to hear what was on it. So we had a few clips from soldiers talking about signing up for going to war after 9/11. Most of the narratives that I collected have about soldiers who've gone to these wars. Many of them had to do with going to fight for the country against the terrorism that was committed against us on 9/11. And many of them talk about becoming disenchanted with those reasons once they were there and seeing that that's not what these wars were really about. And then on top of that, they describe just some of the situations in war that have been just incredibly difficult for them, such as having to kill children who were attacking them, and this idea that that's part of warfare these days. Children are sent with grenades to attack the American soldiers, and they're put in these positions out of self-defense to kill, but the scars of having to kill like that, and kill a child in particular, can leave people haunted by that for decades. So there were a few different pieces that we played in this trailer, and this is part of a 90-minute soundscape, which has kind of music and sound created by a sound artist, Elise Blenner-Hassett, who worked with me on this. So that's what you would have heard in this trailer. And it's very powerful. And it ends with one of the veterans saying, you know, I don't want you to take away my pain, but I just want you to know that you're implicated in my pain. We fought these wars, and basically, you need to know as a public what we've gone through. And I want to come back to that issue of how we're implicated in the wars that we participate in, the public, but often we're morally disengaged from those wars. So Megan's going to talk a little bit about the process of testimony and witnessing.
Yeah. So I think that one of the things that you would have heard is just not just the stories, but some of the challenges around telling the stories. And if you think about what happens when a soldier returns from war, there is what could be described as a silencing, because they are ordered not to share what they've seen. And they have all this information and they know about all this danger, and they're not allowed to talk about it. And so when somebody does make the choice to talk about it and give some kind of testimony about their experience, especially a soldier, they face a series of perils. And they face a series of perils in sharing this with a sort of morally disengaged public, or with an ignorant public, because people don't know what's happening. And so we, as the listeners, we have a series of tasks in listening. And it can be characterized as the person who's providing the testimony as sending out a message in a bottle. And the first peril when you send out a message in a bottle is, will the bottle even reach land? Will anybody be there to receive it? And so it is our role as witnesses, as listeners, to be there to receive the message. And then the second peril is, well, what if the bottle gets sent out and it's received, but it's indecipherable? So we need to be there to understand it, to make sure that it's deciphered, that it's comprehended. And then the third peril is, well, what if it's understood, but it's met with indifference? And one of the ways that indifference, there's a lot of different ways that indifference can happen, but it can certainly happen through othering. And so it's our task to not other, to not say, oh, well, that was your experience and I'm going to have my own experience. It's our task to care, to have compassion, and to be committed to engaging in the process of what we can describe as moral repair, as participating, and, you know, listening. And the fourth peril is, well, what if the message is understood and cared about, but it's not remembered, it's forgotten? And so it's really important that we remember, and art is a way of remembering. And, you know, art is a way of safeguarding evidence against counter-historical revisionism. And then we've got the fifth peril, which is the last one that I'm going to talk about, which is, what if it's remembered, but the telling doesn't do anything to change or prevent future atrocities? And so the task of the listener is to really be activated by it and to take action as a result of hearing these stories. And so I think when we apply that to what's happening now, we see, you know, the fault lines of racism being illuminated by this pandemic, and we see different ways that people are trying to tell their stories. Videos of police brutality are messages in a bottle. The videos of hospital workers who are telling us what it's like to be in the ER, these are messages in a bottle. And so it's really our role to be active participants, to listen, to engage, to understand, to remember, to archive, and to react. So I guess on the note of how we effectively bear witness, I'll turn it back to you, Jack.
So, as I've been doing this work on moral injury, which originally was a concept that was very individual, but I've become interested in the idea that we are dealing with collective moral injury. And even around the pandemic, before all of the recent events happened, we've been talking about how this pandemic has kind of opened up the fault lines in our collective traumas, the layers of collective traumas that exist in our society, and in which we are really, we are dealing with this kind of moral distress, which affects us. I see it in the people who come to me for therapy these days. They're very distressed by how the pandemic is affecting our population, not only the threat, but the unequal way it affects people in our population. And so what I wanted to say that with the soldiers, what became really striking was that in their process of recovering, it's not, they don't recover by going to therapy. They recover by engaging in this process of moral repair, a kind of moral clarification, because they have been morally dislocated. They don't know what's right and wrong after going into a war zone and being told to do certain things, and they come out very confused. And usually what is very helpful for them is to go through a process of clarifying what their basic moral values are, and then giving testimony to a public so that they don't have to carry the burden of this moral this moral guilt on themselves, because they don't share it. When they're isolated with it, they really suffer from this guilt. And and as I said before, it can lead many of them to suicide. And so what we're seeing now that's very helpful in the recovery of the soldiers and others who've been a part of war is this process of understanding, listening, and acknowledging what they've been through, and then joining them in looking at ways of trying to address the problem. And in the case of war, it's addressing the problem of our war making. Now, it's interesting that the racism is very connected with our war making. I think Martin Luther King, in the famous speech at the Riverside Church with the rabbi, I'm blocking on his name.
Heschel.
Yes, Abraham Joshua Heschel was there with him when he gave this speech, linking racism with war. We not only send out the people of color and people from lower socioeconomic status to fight these wars, but we often, but in a way, we export our racism to countries with people of color. We don't engage these kind of wars with white European countries, like even in the Balkans. But I think that there's some problem here in the way that in our response to 9/11, rather than actually going after the terrorists, the result of our response to 9/11 was to go and basically destroy two countries, and this destruction has led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians. And it's a moral problem that we hardly know about or deal with it directly. So I've been really interested in how this is part of our collective moral injury. And these days, with the racism becoming more visible through these recent events, I think that the problem of our war making becomes the kind of prototype for how we need to be dealing with the collective moral injury that we experience in our society on so many different levels. You want to say something else, Megan?
Yeah, I do. I think that the word collective is really important here, because what we're experiencing right now, today, at this very moment, is this really intense divisiveness. And there's been sort of a shattering of any sense of collectivity. You know, everybody's kind of had to just be in their own homes. And so I think that I sort of want to challenge the community, all different kinds of communities, the Jewish community, artist communities, families, whoever, to see how we might strengthen sense of collectivity. It's a question. I don't have an answer, but I think it's an important question.
So this artistic ritual that we've been creating and we're implementing with different communities, we see as one type of prototype for a kind of ritual that can be used to address this issue of collective moral injury. And if you're interested in learning more about it, actually participating in the whole presentation of the installation, you can get in touch with us. In fact, the email address is MIW, Moral Injury of War, miwresponse@gmail.com. And we welcome you to come and participate with us in this installation and learn more about it.
Generally in art practices, because I think we need to re-engage in dialogue and find a shared language. You know, I think that art can function to reaffirm values. It can be embodied, and it is activism. And so I think this is an opportunity to participate in that way. But I imagine that there are so many others that are happening right now and that need to start happening. So.
Okay, I think our time is up.
I think our time is up too.
Jack and Megan, I never want your time to be up after listening to this conversation and hanging on every word. Although we were not able to hear the sound, and I know everyone was scrambling to try to make that happen, I did see a lot of people in the chat say that just being in the presence of that video for the meditative quality was amazing. And what I'd like to ask our hosts is if we could get that email address that Jack just said in the chat so that people can follow up with Jack. And I just want to thank you both so much for this amazing conversation. And then on a day like today, when we've been out in the streets and so many people have taken this risk as a collective to speak truth and to tune into what I think Jack was saying about how much war is connected to racism and how we're even feeling that scourge right now in our country. That idea of moral injury is something that is touching all of us. And I just want to bring it back really quickly to our work here at Lab Shul, because whether you're coming to our soul spas or you've been meeting with us this entire time during our physical distancing, during quarantine, we've been really trying to tap into this collective healing together. And as we push ourselves as a community to open into dialogue about race and oppression and injustice, having artists like you and thinkers like you, Megan and Jack, it's amazing that we get to have you as a community. So thank you for your conversation today and for sharing your amazing work. You're so honored. We're gonna move now, and I just wanna remind everyone in the audience out there in Zoom land that in order to keep doing this work that we're doing, especially at this time where we can't meet in person and have our normal gala, it's really you that's helping to fund these amazing artists and all of this programming. So please dig deep. There are a lot of places to give right now, and we really want to be one of them. And I just want to say that 20% of the money that's coming to us, we're going to be giving to other organizations that are doing really deep and rich work, which you'll be hearing more about throughout the night. Ezra, did you want to talk about the next artist that we have coming up?